Hey, what's going on, guys? Rem Gaming here, back with another video. Today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the Retribution Paladin for patch 11.05, Season 1 of The War Within. This guide's going to be catered specifically towards Mythic Plus. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Starting off with some of the strengths of Retribution Paladin. So when everybody thinks of Retribution Paladin, they typically think burst damage. They're the kings of burst damage, especially in pugs. This is why they're probably the most played DPS specialization in all of WoW at the moment. It's just to how well they perform in lower keys, all the way up to 10, and even higher than 10 they do very well. So they're going to be taking talents like Wake of Ashes and Radiant Glory, which will do a whole bunch of strong AOE burst damage. They also have great utility, such as like Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Protection. They have pretty good mob control, pretty decent interrupts. So we have our Hammer of Justice and our Rebuke. And then we're also very tanky. We have an immunity through our Divine Shield and then our Divine Protection, as well as a pretty decent defensive. Now, in terms of some of our weaknesses, we don't have the best single target damage. So you kind of have to spec into one or the other, single target or AoE. So that is one of the downsides of Retribution Paladin. And then another weakness is they do sometimes have to compete with other Paladin specs, because all the Paladin specs bring a lot of the same utility. But outside of that, there's not too many weaknesses of Retribution Paladin. I think it's a very, very strong spec at the moment for Mythic Plus. Let's quickly go over some key utilities. So we have our Lay on Hands. This is just going to be a very strong single target burst heal. It's going to heal somebody for a very large amount, pretty much take them to 100% health. One thing you do want to be careful of is this will pop forbearance. So you want to make sure that you're not using this on another Paladin who might need their Divine Shield, as this will lock them out of popping their Divine Shield through forbearance. Then one thing that is kind of unique to Retribution Paladin, not many other specializations can do this, is off heal a little bit through their Word of Glory and Flash of Light. So obviously you can heal through Lay on Hands, but you also have more sort of consistent healing through spells like Word of Glory and Flash of Light, which can be very useful if your healer is struggling a bit. Then, of course, we have our Divine Shield like we've talked about already. This grants us full immunity for 8 seconds. So typically you're going to save this for, critical moments or just cheesing specific mechanics. This is probably the strongest defensive in the game. And then we also have our Blessing of Protection. So this will prevent physical damage for 10 seconds on whoever you cast it on. So this can be pretty useful for removing bleeds or just protecting a squishy DPS. You do want to be careful with the spell though, because if you do use it on a tank, they will drop aggro. Up next, we have our Blessing of Freedom. So this is going to remove slows and roots. We also have our Blessing of Sacrifice. So Blessing of Sacrifice is a pretty strong spell because you can pair this with your Divine Shield. So this will transfer 30% of your target's damage to you. And if you pop your Divine Shield on yourself, you're going to be immune to all that damage. So a nice little trick there. We also have our Cleanse Toxin. So it's going to remove a poison and a disease. There are tons of poisons and diseases in this rotation of dungeons. So specifically more poisons than diseases that I'm aware of. So you do want to make sure that you're, just removing as many poisons as you possibly can throughout the course of the dungeon to help support your healer. And then we also have our Devotion Aura. So a passive ability here, and it's going to grant 3% group-wide damage reduction. So let's talk about how to actually play Retribution Paladin. So one of the main things that you want to be focused on is not wasting any Holy Power. Overcapping on Holy Power is a huge hit to your DPS, so you want to make sure that you're spending it as efficiently as possible. So ensure that you are keeping your generators on cooldown as much as possible to generate all that Holy Power, and make sure that you're spending it as efficiently as you possibly can without overcapping to waste damage. All right, let's talk about the Retribution Paladin opener. So your opener is going to be pretty much the same in all scenarios. It's going to be a immediate Blade of Justice into a Divine Toll, into Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes, and then into 2 Final Verdicts. Then after this happens, then you can go into either your AOE or single target priority. So Blade of Justice and Divine Toll are used at the start because they're going to get some very core debuffs up on the target. Then we want to get Execution Sentence up on the target as quick as we can, because the target is going to take 20% of the damage taken from your other abilities as holy damage during the duration of Execution Sentence. So we ensure that we're able to funnel as much damage into that Execution Sentence as we possibly can. And then from there, we kind of go into our burst. We get the burn effect from our Wake of Ashes, all the burst damage that comes with it, into 2 large Final Verdicts. Now, one thing you can also do as well is you can trinket and you can use your potion in between your execution sentence and your Wake of Ashes. So, go ahead and squeeze that in if you can. And this is just going to be more damage that we're funneling into that execution sentence window. Now, those last two final verdicts can be replaced with Divine Storm if you are in an AOE scenario. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Let's go ahead and dive into the single target priority. So it's going to look very similar to our opener. We're still kind of playing around execution sentence, and then we're going to follow our execution sentence up with a lot of hard hitting single target abilities. So like our final verdict at 5 holy power, and then a Blade of Justice. Now you only want to be following it up with a Blade of Justice if Expurgation isn't active on the target. So just to take a quick look at these first few steps. So final verdict, you want to make sure you're spending it at 5 holy power. You don't ever really want to be using it at less than 5 holy power. And this is one of the reasons it's almost always more important to cast a generator rather than a spender if you are below that cap on holy power, that 5 holy power. So before you do cast that execution sentence, make sure you have 5 holy power to follow it up with a very quick and efficient final verdict. Then again, your Blade of Justice, we already talked about that. If Expurgation isn't active, then that goes into a very big Wake of Ashes into Divine Toll combo. Now, one thing, you will only be able to get a Divine Toll in every other execution sentence window. So just kind of be aware of that. If Divine Toll is not off cooldown, you will actually skip that step. But you should be able to follow up every execution sentence with a Wake of Ashes since they are both on 30-second cooldowns. Then steps 6 and 7 are a bit optional, depending on whether or not you received a Blessing of Onshape proc. So if you did get the proc, go ahead and funnel a Hammer of Wrath into the execution sentence. And then if the target is below 35% health, kind of in that execution range, then we can also use a Hammer of Wrath here as well. And then from here, we kind of go back into our generators. So we'll be casting a Judgment if less than 3 holy power, a Blade of Justice into a Hammer of Wrath, and then finally a final verdict. Okay, then for our AOE rotation or priority, it's going to look very similar to the single target. The only things that really change is that Divine Storm is now being swapped out with our final verdict. And then Blades of Justice does kind of bump up in priority due to the cleaving power of Expurgation. So you want to use this priority here at 2 or more targets. So again, going to be pretty similar stuff to single target. We do an execution sentence into a Divine Storm, then a Wake of Ashes into a Divine Toll. Again, very similar to how it was in single target priority. You can only line up every other Divine Toll with your execution sentence window. And this is kind of where we see the bump in Blade of Justice priority. So in the single target rotation, we had Blade of Justice. We did have it at the top, but that was only if Expurgation was not active. So now it doesn't matter if it's active or not, you're going to be pressing Blade of Justice. And then we go into just sort of our normal filler rotation, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, and then we will spend the holy power generated with our Divine Storm. Okay, moving on to our secondary stats. So just to cut to the chase here, it's going to be Strength over Mastery, over Haste, over Critical Strike, then finally Versatility. So Mastery is our High Lord's Judgment. Now this is going to be a very strong passive for us because this is going to buff essentially all of Retribution's natural damage. So this is going to buff pretty much everything for Retribution, Paladin, all of our baseline spells and talents. And we do have 3 or 4 spells here that do synergize with Mastery. So we have our Boundless Judgment, we have our High Lord's Wrath, and we also have our Seal of Might. So if you are running something like Retribution Paladin, it could be nice to run with a Shaman of any type due to the new class buff that they provide. So keep that in mind when you are forming your Paladins group. Then we also have Haste. So Haste is going to be pretty nice because the more spells that we can cast, the more holy power that we can generate. So this is going to reduce the GCD and cooldown of pretty much all of our rotational abilities. So Haste is very strong for us. Up next is Critical Strike. Then we do have a couple spells here that synergize with our Critical Strike. Education, as well as Heart of the Crusader. So somewhat powerful for Retribution Paladin, but we do just scale better with both Mastery and Haste than Critical Strike. And then finally, we have Versatility. And Versatility for most DPS specs is typically lower on the list, but it is nice to have some to kind of help prevent damage, especially that spiky damage from boss fights once you get into higher keys. And then here is a quick look at the Mythic Plus talents that we will be running. This is the Templar Hero Tree. We will be dropping an import string in the description of the video. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this one. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. And then we also do have a Patreon link in the description of the video if you guys want to help out and support our work. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.